We've got another great story to share with you today, an inspiring journey into local government leadership, because that's what we do here on the HaltingWinter podcast. We tell the stories behind the titles, the unique paths into public service, and the moments that shape how these leaders show up, even when the work gets heavy. Every day, local government quietly makes modern life possible, and behind every service is a person doing work that often goes unseen. This is the HaltingWinter podcast, and I'm Seth Winterhalter. Every week, I have the pleasure of sitting down with local government leaders from across the country that remind us where government really lives, locally, doing the work that truly matters. This is the work that builds belonging. Before we hear today's conversation, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Tyler Technologies has been exclusively serving the public sector since 1998, partnering with cities and counties to make their work more manageable, more connected, and more effective. From smarter budgeting to artificial intelligence, Tyler equips local governments with software and solutions that help leaders serve with clarity, efficiency, and impact. You can explore a variety of free resources at tylertech.com/winter. That's tylertech.com/winter. And if today's conversation resonates with you, I want to invite you to check out the Municipal Leadership Development Circle. It's a global community of local government leaders who are committed to growing together, supporting one another, and leading well in the middle of municipal pressure. You can learn more about the MLDC at haltingwinter.com/MLDC. That's haltingwinter.com/MLDC. And now, let's turn to today's conversation. My guest on the podcast today is Mike Van Milligen, City Manager in Dubuque, Iowa. Mike, welcome to the podcast. It is a pleasure to have you on today.
Well, Seth, thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, you have recently announced your retirement a year from now, June 2027, and what a legend you are in city management and municipal leadership, and we're going to get to why that is. You, again, all the accolades, all the awards, but you have again just 30, I think it's 33 years in the city management seat in one city. I mean, that is a phenomenal ride, and the impact. And I can't wait to dive into that, what that's looked like, because when you think about that, the last 30 plus years have, radically changed. And before that, even, I'm going to get into your parents. I think that your parents are great generation, the great generation, walking through the Depression. Yep. And so in your life and in your parents' lifetime, to see the change that has happened, I mean, in so many ways, technologically, just culturally. What a fascinating conversation we're going to have today. But I want to tease the audience. You got to stick around to the end, because we're going to go through the four management or the four guiding principles that you say are kind of the foundations of your management philosophy, and they are gold. Right. They are amazing, and I think they're going to be a huge takeaway. But before we get to all that, let's do what we do here on the HaltingWinter podcast. Take us back to the very beginning, Mike, and tell us about where you were born and kind of that initial childhood experience that shaped you.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, first of all, you talk about my parents being the members of the greatest generation. That's so very true. So they grew up during the Great Depression. They both are World War II veterans. Matter of fact, their first date was New Year's Eve, 1944 in New Guinea. So my dad was a lieutenant in the Army, and my mom was a corporal in what's called the Women's Army Corps. They call them the WACs, WACs. And she had an office job in the war zone. And my dad had an injury, so he had a temporary assignment for several months in an office position, and he met my mom. And so they got married when they got out, and had 6 kids, which I'm the youngest of the 6. And, back in those days, I think you would call them middle class. I don't know if you'd call them middle class today. It was the days before credit cards and short-term loans and all those kinds of things. So guess what? Whatever you made every 2 weeks is what you lived on. And we lived in a little 2-bedroom house with I was going to say the 8 of us, but my great uncle lived with us for 7 years. And when he passed away, then my grandmother moved in with us for 7 years. So the 9 of us. But my brothers and I, my one of my brothers and I slept in the hallway on the main floor. But you know what? We never knew it. We never, no, none of our friends ever said, gee, you sleep in the hallway. Or, I mean, it just never came up. That was just way people lived, however it worked out. And, your friends were your friends. And that just was the way it was. So, but anyway, it was an idyllic childhood. So, I was so blessed and so fortunate to have two parents, have them stick together. My mom lived till she was 99. My dad lived till he was 94. Uh, in the last 10 years of their lives, they moved from Chicago, which is where south suburb of Chicago, where I grew up. They moved here to Dubuque. And so I got to spend the last 10 years of their lives with them. And I mean, it was just a unbelievably fabulous experience for me, my kids, and my grandkids. So
that is so cool. And like you say, growing up, you don't know, like you take for, it's just, this is the way the world is at that time. And six kids and were they all boys?
No. So there's four boys and two girls. And I was the youngest of the six. As I said, the first five were born 1 year after another. And then I came 4 years later. So my oldest brother was 9 years older than me. I remember him joining the Army when he got out of high school. And I remember my and he didn't go to Vietnam, but my second oldest brother, he joined, and he was a medic in Vietnam, and unfortunately the Agent Orange experience of Vietnam, it doesn't manifest itself in the veterans till they get in their 60s and 70s. And so now his lungs are damaged, his kidneys are damaged from Agent Orange. But, he lived a very successful and enjoyable and productive life until now he's got this disability that he has to deal with. So we got to keep our veterans in mind. First of all, PTSD is a real thing. And I don't know how everybody has some element of it. You can't go to war and not. But then there's a lot of other things that the things they've kept with them, all that time, like Agent Orange, that's manifesting itself now.
Yeah. It's one of the roles, again, of government and all forms of government is how do we care for our people? And I think that's one of the things. If we want a country that is safe, that is protected, then there are, prices to pay for that. And how do we do that? How do we support? And maybe that's the point of even, it seems like when you look back, I think about that time period and community and how community just functioned. There was much more of an awareness of together, of this is the community, this is how we support one another. I mean, I remember as a kid, I lived on a ranch and there were, only a handful of neighbors because we lived out in the middle of nowhere, but you would have people all the time stopping at the house. And whether that was I needed some sugar or, because I need to make cookies and I'm not going to drive a half an hour in to go get sugar to make cookies. But even just chatting and talking. And just, there was always someone pulling up to the barn, to chat about the weather or whatnot. And it just seems like now we kind of, I lived in a suburban neighborhood with hundreds of houses and I barely knew anyone. It was like we pull into our garage, it closes, and we kind of turn off the outside world.
Yeah. And neighborhoods have become, more challenging and less supportive. There's no doubt about it. But I just got done. I love to read, one of my hobbies. And I just got done reading one of the greatest books, quite frankly, I've ever read. It's called What's the Point? Turning Purpose into Your Daily Superpower. It's by a guy by the name of Tom Rath. And this is a guy, when he was 16 years old, he was diagnosed with cancer. And they said, okay, we can treat it. It's slow moving, but we can't cure it. And we want you to know you're never going to see your 40th birthday. So he wrote this book when he turned 40. And this idea of having purpose in your life. I'll give you an example for my wife and I. We've had over 30 children live in our home in our lifetime, with foster kids, foreign exchange students, quite frankly, sometimes families that just needed help. One lived with us for over a year. There's all kinds of ways for you to experience your life. And even in these days of cell phones and, all the social media, things like that, there's still there's a very personal part of life where you can support and help others succeed.
So true. And I think that I bring it up also with community is because I think local government plays a unique role there that doesn't often get credit. We think about
Right.
local gov. If we think about it, local gov at all, we might think about emergency response or, fixing streets and water, sewer. But the above ground infrastructure of our libraries and our events, the festivals that happen, there's a lot
Right.
that local gov is the impetus for, to make sure that we do have things that identify our community, kind of give it some culture, some context, and bring us together. So let's go to your stories. You're growing up. What did you think about what did Mike think he was going to become when he was aiming towards kind of post high school?
Yeah. And so I really can't give a good answer why I felt this way, but I pretty much always knew I wanted to be a police officer. And so that when I graduated from high school, I went to college and majored in law enforcement. And then when I graduated from college, I was fortunate enough to get a job as a police officer in the college town that I went to school, Carbondale, Illinois, where Southern Illinois University is. And I worked nights and I went to school during the day and got my master's degree in public affairs or public administration. And thinking, oh, someday maybe I'll be fortunate enough to be a police chief. And, then circumstances just happen and you get offers that you didn't expect. And here I am. I ended up becoming a city manager. And I'll be frank with you, I never even heard of the job of city manager when I was in college. I didn't even know it existed.
You and so many. It's always so tickly to me that how the vast majority of city managers that I interview had no idea the position even existed, when they were growing up. And so let's get into that. So first off, you mentioned Carbondale, Illinois. We had the pleasure of having Stan Reno, city manager of Carbondale, on the podcast. In unique tie-in, he was a police chief and became the city manager. And Stan's an amazing person with an amazing story. Go back and listen to episode 267. You get a kind of a picture of the unique reality of Carbondale, because it's this city with the university there. Southern Illinois is so big. It's such a huge part of that city. And it's kind of has a dramatic effect on the culture there. What was that like? You worked as a police officer there for a good chunk of time, I think almost 8 years. What was that like in that line of work, in that kind of environment?
Well, it was an interesting time in the history of our country. So I started as a police officer in 1977. So the Vietnam War had just ended. And kind of the way I express it is a lot of the police officers I worked with were Vietnam veterans. And quite frankly, a lot of the people we arrested were Vietnam veterans. There was a lot of tough things came out of the Vietnam War. And so it was an interesting dynamic. I mean, it still is in the days when you had riots. And so I think we can feel blessed that the experience, I think, more lately is less dramatic from that perspective, more dramatic, quite frankly, from civic discourse, which I think has really gone off track. But so it was an interesting time to be a police officer in a college town with a lot of dynamics happening all at the same time. But I have to tell you, I loved my job, and I still to this day. So 1977 to 1984 was a long time ago. I still have lunch once a year with the people that I worked with. And as a matter of fact, one of my old sergeants we're going on a 3-day vacation together, my wife and I, and he and his wife, over Labor Day weekend. So it's just an association that you just never lose.
It's a powerful, the power of working together, and that's why I think local government is such a powerful career of mission. Right, you obviously as a police officer, you're day to day handling real life situations, serving, protecting, right, engaging, and the bonds you form. I think not only in missional work, but in kind of that unique. There's a different level of on that you have to be as a police officer. Those can forge some really dynamic relationships.
You really do. It's not the military. I've never been in the military. I haven't had that experience. And I can imagine the bonds that are formed there. But first responders, police, fire, ambulance, those people every day, they deal with life and death situations. And it's very impactful.
Well, it's going to be interesting to look at the next two stops on your on your resume. You go to Jackson County, Illinois, and work as the administrative assistant to the sheriff. Now you're in a county setting. That's a little more unique. You're going to end up in the village of Skokie. Skokie, am I saying that right?
Yeah, Skokie, Illinois, right.
Skokie, you're going to be administrative assistant. It seems like you're kind of now focusing more on the administrative than in the streets kind of policing. Talk about that. Talk about Jackson County and what kind of that environment was, and then moving to the village of Skokie, and what kind of maybe we don't, when we think about police, we think about cops, and we think about the shows where the police are in the streets doing the work. What does that look like, the administrative? We've had on some dispatchers lately. We've had on some unique people that their stories have wound through kind of the areas that kind of are shrouded a little bit that the public doesn't know about. Talk about the administrative kind of weight and role that goes on.
Yeah, so I was real fortunate with that Jackson County thing with the sheriff's department. So Carbondale, Illinois is located in Jackson County. And so the sheriff of Jackson County was a former Carbondale police officer, and he needed some administrative assistance on a part-time basis. And I'd never had any administrative experience, even though I was getting a master's degree, and I wanted to someday, I thought, be a police chief. And so he hired me part-time to do some of his administrative work for about 6 months. And during that period was when this position opened up in Skokie, Illinois, which is a north suburb of Chicago. So it's 350 miles from Carbondale. And it was a non-sworn position. It was the administrative assistant to the chief of police, and you were in charge of planning and budgeting. And I have to confess that my wife and I saw that job opportunity, and I was excited about it because now is my chance to really break into administration. And the last day the application was due, my wife asked me, she said, "Mike, did you mail that application in yet?" I said, "You know what, honey? I really love being a police officer. I love my job. We love this area that we live in." And she said, "Wait a minute, Mike, why don't you send your application in? And if you get an interview, feel blessed. And if you get a job offer, then make a decision. But don't make it before you even mail the thing in." I said, "Well, good point." So anyway, obviously I applied and I got the job. And it was a great opportunity because the chief there was very forward thinking, and he helped me get all kinds of continuing education in the 2 years that I worked for him. He was very supportive of me in many different ways. And then one day the city manager offered me a job in the manager's office. He said, "Would you like to move over to the manager's office? I have a vacancy over here." And I did. Then I became the assistant city manager. And then when the manager retired, the assistant got promoted to manager, and I became the assistant manager. And I did that for 6 years and loved it, but decided if I was ever going to be a manager, because now my new goal wasn't to be a police chief anymore, it was to be a city manager. The manager was only a couple of years older than me, and it was a good decision because he stayed for like 20 years after I left. But anyway, so we applied it here in Dubuque, and we're fortunate enough to get this job as the city manager 33 years ago now.
Oh, it's so awesome. Talk about, you get to Skokie, you're the admin assistant and to the chief of police. And like you said, your vision now is, this is going to be great because it's going to help me step into eventually that role of chief of police. Then I'm sure in that role, because you said it's budgeting and planning, that you're probably now becoming aware of a city manager and city management.
Right.
I'm sure you worked all together with the departments. What was that like to kind of get your eye on that? And when you became the assistant to the village manager, how much did that open up your eyes to that unique role?
Well, yeah. So working in the police department as the administrative assistant to the chief, and as I got introduced to the manager's office and all the different functions a city performs, sure, I learned about them in a classroom, but now actually experiencing them, yeah, my career goal changed pretty quickly. I was like, okay, I really don't want to be a police chief anymore. I'd like to someday be a city manager. But I wasn't completely clear on, how was I ever going to make that happen? So it was kind of fun. I volunteered to run the United Way program for the entire city organization. So I had all these great ideas. I got a signed football from the Chicago Bears. We're going to raffle off and all kinds of things like that. But so I went over to a meeting with the city manager to tell him about all these United Way ideas I had. And I'll never forget, he said, you mind if I have Al, who was the assistant, come in and sit with us? I said, oh, sure. And then he shut the door. And I was like, okay, well, I don't think I'm talking about anything secret here about United Way. And he said, hey, before we get this United Way stuff, hey, I have a new vacancy. We just had a resignation yesterday of our public information officer. Would you have any interest in coming over and working in the manager's office? And like I said, I had developed that interest in seeing how you could impact the future of a community in so many different ways and the quality of life of the residents. I was like, yeah, I'd be really interested in coming over here. And of course I did. And then when I became the assistant, I got involved in all kinds of different projects. I'll tell you about one. Skokie has one of the highest concentration of Holocaust survivors in the entire country. It's a very diverse community. And the Holocaust Survivors Organization decided they wanted to put a monument on the village green, and the city council there agreed to do it. And I was put in charge of being a liaison with the Holocaust Survivors Group. And so I spent well over a year working with them as they raised the money and created the design and built the monument. And one of the greatest honors of my life is they wrote a little book, The Story of Building the Monument, and I'm in the acknowledgments. And I can't tell you how much pride that gives me, because if you heard these stories, they were just, you can't even imagine that things like this happen to families and people. And the fact that I got to work with them and that they thought so much of my work, they put me in their acknowledgments, was really a great honor.
One thing I've learned from hosting hundreds of conversations with local government leaders is this: the challenges never stop changing. So many conversations seem to come back to the same question. How do you keep moving your community forward when there's never enough time, money, people, or certainty? You're always looking for ways to work smarter, make better decisions with limited resources, and prepare for what's coming next, all while still delivering the services your residents count on every day. That is why I'm grateful for partners like Tyler Technologies. Tyler has put together 3 free ebooks specifically for local government leaders that I think are well worth your time. One explores how your team can use AI to eliminate repetitive work and improve your efficiency. Another highlights how cloud technology can help modernize your operations. And the third focuses on how your organization can remain resilient, even when things don't go according to plan. You can download all 3 ebooks for free, along with several other resources, all at tylertech.com/winter. Again, tylertech.com/winter. And if you're going to be attending the NACO annual conference, it's in New Orleans this July, stop by booth number 231 and connect with the Tyler team. They would love to learn more about your community and the unique challenges that you are facing. While you're there, if you'd like to see how AI is being used in an actual government setting, make sure to attend the Technology Innovation Forum. It's featuring Fulton County and Tyler Technologies. You're going to hear how they are putting these tools to work in their day-to-day operations and what they're learning along the way. To learn more about AI that works to make your county or your city government far more efficient, visit tylertech.com/winter. Now, let's get back to the conversation. I think it's one of the things where, you've mentioned it now a couple times, but purpose and living for purpose and looking at what is my real purpose? What impact am I having on the world? And I think that's where, just because we have so many students that listen to the podcast, and that's one of the main goals, is that we just encourage young people to look. Local government, like you say, now local government isn't getting a lot of parades thrown for it because the trash was picked up and the water and sewer work.
Right.
But it's that kind of work that you get to do, that you get to, and again, you got a little accolade, you got a little mention.
Yeah, it felt pretty good.
Felt great, I'm sure. But even if you hadn't, the ability that you were a part of that you made it happen. And that's the cool thing, is you live in the place that you make that happen for that moment. You get to see that statue. You get to see those people go to that event and know that you were a part of making that happen.
Right.
Those are significant things. That's why I think local government is such a powerful work.
Yeah, working in local government is so rewarding. But I do have to admit, that as the civic discourse has become so challenging lately, the way I describe being a city manager now is it's a full contact sport. I mean, what people will say online about you or to you and make up, almost all of it, quite frankly, made up. They've never even met you, you know, and I excited that young people still want to get into this profession, and I hope that our country starts changing the way we talk about people, talk to people, and get things done. So yeah, it's a great profession.
Absolutely agree that yeah the age of incivility and kind of not only misrepresentation, but I think like you said, it's almost caricature. Like it's kind of like, and maybe even speak to, because you were the public information officer, back in the mid late '80s. I'm sure public PIOs have changed incredibly now, having to deal with
Yeah, right.
social media, and like you say, it's never usually the profiles with a name and a picture on it, a real picture. It's some anonymous account that just treats you like that. You're an anonymous kind of position that they just want to
Right.
throw stones at because it didn't. I think that's part of this thing that we have to. We hopefully this podcast encourages people to go, oh, I didn't know local gov did so much to make my life enjoyable, to bring community together, to keep things flourishing, but also to remember that yes, leaders live in glass, glass fish tanks kind of,
Right.
but I think there is a decorum that we should have, and a communication, a way of communicating that I think has respect and can have disagreement, should have, I think that's the fun of engagement, is fierce opinions about the way we actually do things for greater flourishing. But yeah, just it seems the lack of thinking, the lack of any kind of decorum, and just not even healthy communication is challenging, isn't it?
Yeah, the one thing that I'm a big believer in, and I would encourage anybody getting into this profession or any other profession, quite frankly, is focus on emotional intelligence. Study it, learn about it. It is a learned skill. It's not just some people are emotionally intelligent and some people aren't. And but it's probably the most important skill that you can have. And it reminds me of something my dad used to say to me. Is he said, Mike, you can't control what other people say or do. You can only control your reaction to it. Now, my dad didn't know this, but he was on the forefront of emotional intelligence because that's, one of the key ideas there. But I think if you can do that, and so you can step back and you can take and accept the criticism and not react to it, you're going to have a pretty successful life and career, whether it's city management or anything else.
Such a great point. Is you are in now Skokie, serving as the assistant village manager. You do that for about 5 years. When in that timeline did you know, like, okay, I want to become a city manager and I got to start now looking for city management?
Yeah. So like I said, it was when I felt like I was certainly knowledgeable that the man I was working for was not much older than me, and he was very successful in Skokie. And so if I wanted to be a manager, it wasn't going to be there. And, my wife and I sat down, had that difficult conversation because, you're talking about uprooting your family. Now, for the first 10 years we were married, my wife didn't work outside the home, even though we met in graduate school. She had a master's degree in public affairs. And so, we had that interesting family conversation is, okay, is this what we want to do for the rest of our career here and what I'm doing now? Or do we want to take the next step up into being a manager? And we decided that the right thing to do was take the next step into being a manager. And so we just took a compass on a paper map. I don't know if people use paper maps anymore. And I don't know if people know what a compass is actually, but where we just drew a circle, 300-mile circle from the Chicago area, because my parents lived in the Chicago area. Her parents lived in Rockford, which was about 90 miles to the west of Chicago. And we said, okay, we want to live in this 300-mile area, and we want to be in a town. Skokie was about 60,000 people. We thought that was a nice, manageable size. So we want to be in, 25,000 to 75,000 population city. And, fortunately, Dubuque fit all that criteria, and I applied and I got the job. So yeah, it was just, do we want to take the next career step or not? And we decided that we did want to take it.
I love it. And I love that, again, just is showing us the intention, right? We still wanted to be within this certain distance of family, because that's important, this value. And so you draw the circle. Here's what's interesting for the national audience who might not be familiar with Dubuque. Dubuque is on the far eastern, side of Iowa. It's closer to Chicago than it is probably to Des Moines. So
It is, yeah.
So tell us about that, because in city management, I often say it can be a very lonely, isolated world, especially as a city manager, because you're the only city manager in that city, and it's not like you can go to a chamber of commerce luncheon and hang out with other city managers, or
yeah, right.
You have to kind of be intentional, and you're in the far side of a state where I'm sure at times it was like, man, can I just go to the Illinois City Management Association? Like, what did
right
that
across the river,
right? And I was just there. I just keynoted the ILCMA's.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, last conference. And again, what a great group of people. And Wisconsin, you're close to us. I keynoted the Wisconsin one this last year. So
right
tell
across
us about
the river there too.
Right. Tell us about what it's like in that unique city. Because again, Madison is close, Chicago's close. Iowa can kind of feel maybe even far away at times. And yet you're so impacted by, local gov is impacted by state legislation,
right.
and just, each state kind of does things a little different. Tell us about that. What was it like being the city manager of that unique location?
Yeah, well, one thing, you talk about Chicago being closer than the state capital of Des Moines. You're right, it is. And the nice thing about Dubuque is I'm still able to stay a Cubs fan and go to Cubs games. So I love that. It's still just a day trip to go to a Cubs game. Well, when I took the job in Dubuque was just on the back end of experiencing some really hard times. And I started here in 1993, but in the 1980s, Dubuque lost 10% of its population. At one point, they had the highest unemployment rate in the country at over 23%. And that's what, those were it was the farm crisis, which agricultural affects Dubuque, but it was the manufacturing crisis, as manufacturing was moving to different countries, and John Deere manufactures construction equipment here. So they have about 2,500 employees, about half of them are engineers and designers, and about half of them are manufacturing people. But so as I said, in the 80s, they'd lost 10% of their population, had the highest unemployment rate in the country. And so I was fortunate enough to be hired as a city manager in 93. And the first thing I did when I walked into my office was I wanted to read the city's comprehensive plan, because of course that's the roadmap to the future, right? Well, it was dated 1936. So they didn't have a plan. And that's quite frankly why bad things were happening to them. Now, fortunately for me, before I got here, the city council had already realized that and had started a process to develop a plan. And 2 years after I started here, a new plan was adopted. And then, quite frankly, we just went about implementing the plan. And every year, the mayor and city council, to this day, quite frankly, every year, the mayor and council would meet for a 3-day strategic planning session with a professional facilitator. And they'd say, okay, here's the priorities for the next year out of the plan. And let's just keep chipping away at them. And it worked. So in the 33 years, we've regained all of our population loss back. As a matter of fact, we're at the highest population we've ever been. And you might say, well, okay, well, that's great, but big deal. If you look nationally, especially in the Midwest, that didn't happen. There's still cities that are 50% smaller than they were in the 1970s. 50%. And I'm talking about big cities like Youngstown, Ohio. I'm not talking about towns of 5,000 people. And so, the community just came together and said, we got a plan, and we're going to plan our work, and we're going to work our plan. We're going to chip away at it. And that's what we did. That's what we did. And quite frankly, that's what we're doing today. We've obviously updated the plan twice in the last 33 years, but yeah. So, it's in a way, it I think worked to our advantage that we're this community all by ourselves sitting out here, because everybody realized nobody was going to come in and save us. It was, no, we got to all roll up our sleeves and start working together and make stuff happen. And wow, I got to tell you, what a great place to live and work today. So I had a saying that when I apply, because being assistant city manager or village manager was called there in Skokie was a great job. And so when I applied for this job, everybody thought I was crazy. When I took the job, everybody knew I was crazy. Now everybody wants my job. So,
I love it. It's what a journey, and in what you've said there, I resonate with, because it's one of the things we would like to do with the podcast is expand into kind of a video, almost a show series, where we go to these places across the nation that have exactly what you said. They had something happened. The dairy market crashed. Manufacturing has moved. The mine or the mill shut down, and a city had to redevelop its identity. And many cities, like you said, have not done that. It's almost like they can't do it. They can't let go of the past because that's all they've ever known. And that's kind of the human story. If you get comfortable in something, if you do not practice growth, development, self-awareness, taking action, you will stay where you're at, and you tend to become kind of bitter and angry then at those who move. And I think, how do we inspire other places to do the work that places like Dubuque have done, which is challenging. I'm sure, man, I'm sure when you create probably the reason why it didn't have a strategic plan is like, well, A, you had people that go, well, what's the point? B, it's too hard. It's, whatever the excuses are. Maybe talk about that. How did that, it's one thing, it seemed like maybe there was, maybe I'll ask two questions. First, were they just making it because they felt like, oh my gosh, like we've got to do this? What was there energy and excitement behind it? Or was it kind of the drudgery of like, well, I guess we just have to do it? And then as you were doing it, again, if you haven't done a strategic plan, if that's not a part of the mantra and the culture, I'm sure that once that hit, its first trouble point, it was like, again, what's the point? These are all foolish. Like, talk about the initial process of doing the plan and then really some of the roadblocks you faced trying to move it forward.
Sure. Well, first of all, to talk about the 80s one last time, there was a billboard said, the last person to leave Dubuque, please turn out the lights. And there was a lot of defeatism. However, as I said, just before I got here, they formed, the city council formed a long-range planning commission. And what they challenged the commission with is they said, we want you to create a vision for Dubuque. Before we create a plan, what's our vision? And they spent 2 years working on that. And one of the things they did was they created an asset map where they asked the community, what are our assets? Now, we're right on the Mississippi River. And so you might think, obviously, everybody knew the Mississippi River was one of their greatest assets. And the answer is no, they didn't. The city had turned its back on the river a long time ago. It was a place where you just wouldn't go. The weeds overgrown, buildings falling down, a flood wall protecting the city, but also, that being 6-8 feet high, you can't even see the river in most places. But through that asset mapping process, it came out the greatest asset we have is the Mississippi River. So then when the comprehensive planning process started, and by the way, 6,000 citizens participated in the comprehensive planning process. So there was a lot of energy around it. And they started coming up with plans for the river. And one of the first plans that was adopted and we began implementing was called the America's River Project. We took this 90-acre campus along the river. The city owned some of it, mostly was privately owned. We went about buying all the properties. We didn't end up with all of them, but most of them. All of the riverfront ones we did, the ones that actually abutted the river. And the Dubuque County Historical Society, so a little historical society like any place in America, trying to preserve the city's history, they decided they wanted to build the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium. And they said it was a $25 million project. And I'll never forget, I was at that meeting. I just got chills. I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. Well, the America's River Project ended up being $400 million. The museum itself ended up being $100 million, and no debt. They raised every nickel of it, the little Dubuque County Historical Society. We built a convention center right on the river. They built their $400 million museum. A lot of other development happened in the what we now call the Port of Dubuque, a beautiful hotel with an indoor water park. And as I said, it ended up being $400 million. So the community was like, yeah, we can do this. And quite frankly, then just one thing after another. One of the nice things about Dubuque, it's built into the rock bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River. It's just absolutely beautiful. There's not a flat spot anywhere to be seen. So that's great, but it also makes it really expensive to develop. So we needed some industrial park land. We couldn't get anybody to invest the amount of money you had to. So the city now owns about 1,500 acres of industrial park land. The first tranche was 900 acres. We spent $23 million investing in that 900 acres to grade it, to put the roads in, the water, the sewer. Now there's over 6,000 jobs in that first phase of the industrial park. And over 85% of them were local businesses that needed a place to expand, which, by the way, they would have expanded, but it just would have been some other city. But they wanted to be here, and now they could be. And the rest of them, yeah, they're new companies that came to town. And of course, we're thrilled for that too. But then what happened next? So we're the oldest city in the state of Iowa. So the building I'm sitting in now, City Hall, was built in 1858 before the Civil War. And it's a beautiful building, and it's a beautiful historic downtown. But it had become very much run down because before they built the flood wall in the 60s, the downtown used to flood, but doesn't anymore. And so the next thing was a downtown master plan, and we partnered with building owners. We did inspections. We've created financial incentive programs. They started to restore their buildings, restore the upper story apartments, put first floor retail. And as I said, it just keeps going. Then we had this old manufacturing area right near the river where they used to float the logs down from Minnesota and Wisconsin, bring them off the river here. And they used to build furniture, doors and windows, things like that. But 100 years ago, that all left here and went out to Washington and Oregon. So those buildings were giant 4-story manufacturing buildings. Brick buildings were becoming vacant and abandoned. First, they became warehouses. Then they went to the vacancy part. And so that was the next project, the historic Millwork District. So now we've had $200 million of investment there. The upper stories are apartments. The main stories are offices and shopping and restaurants. It's everybody wants to be there now, a place that before you wouldn't go. We had another part of our community that flooded, not from the Mississippi River, but from a tributary that drained into the river and went right through the lowest income neighborhoods in our community. And over 100 years ago, they buried the river in an underground culvert so that they could have more development. Well, guess what? As development happened upstream, that culvert wasn't big enough. So we had 6 presidential disaster declarations for flooding in those neighborhoods in 11 years. So you basically every other year, you knew your car was going to float down the street, your basement was going to fill with water. So, and it's the lowest income neighborhoods in our community. So there wasn't a lot of investment happening. So the council formed a 40-member resident task force from that neighborhood and said, okay, we got to figure this out. This can't go on. We ended up doing a $250 million stormwater management project, all designed by that 40-member resident committee. With obviously we hired engineers to help them. And they said, well, what we don't want is a concrete ditch through our neighborhood. So we built this beautiful linear park. What we did is we took the underground culvert out and we put the stream back in. We acquired 100 properties, 60 of them with homes on them. And it's called the Bee Branch Creek Flood Mitigation Project. And now those neighborhoods don't flood anymore. And so guess what? People are investing back in their homes and their neighborhoods. The commercial spaces are filling up. They have this beautiful linear park. We've got walking paths, hanging flower baskets. We took their almost 3-acre park that they had in their neighborhood and spent $5 million on that park and put in splash pads and basketball courts. And that all connects to this linear park that then connects with the walking path on the Mississippi River. So my point being is, once you create that sense of energy of, yeah, if we all work together, we come up with a common vision, we can make stuff happen. So we've been designated an All-America City by the National Civic League 5 times. And I call that the Academy Award of Community Engagement. And I use that example of the council formed that 40-member citizen committee from the neighborhoods. So it's doing things with people instead of for people. So the council didn't say, hey, we got an idea. Here's how we're going to fix your flooding problem. They said, no, let's work together. Let's figure out what's causing this problem. Let's figure out what the potential options are for a solution. Let's figure out how much it's going to cost. And then let's figure out how we're going to pay for it. And the council implemented a stormwater management fee where it's based on your impermeable surface. So guess what? Walmart pays a heck of a lot more than I do at my house in a monthly fee that we got. Of the $250 million, we got $160 million, I think it was, in federal and state grants. So obviously that helped hugely. But the rest of it all comes from that stormwater management fee and debt issued from that.
I have this unique pleasure, this unique opportunity to meet with thousands of local government leaders from across the nation every year through conferences and workshops and the podcast. Just these interviews, these conversations are just so insightful. And one of the things I have learned about local government leaders is this: the best leaders are lifelong learners, not because they have all the answers. It's because they understand that leadership, that journey of leadership, is never finished. Every challenge, every difficult conversation, every budget season, every organizational change or disruption is another opportunity to grow. That's why this summer we're doing something different inside the Municipal Leadership Development Circle. We're launching a special summer series called Stories That Shape Leaders. You know that every week I take a best-selling book, usually a business book, and we break down its insights and apply them to local gov. This summer, we're taking biographies, memoirs, timeless leadership books that don't necessarily fall into those typical business, culture, strategy kind of genre. And we're going to explore the lives, the decisions, the failures, challenges, the lessons of leaders who navigated incredible adversity, who had to build trust when hope was fleeting, who inspired others not only to dream but to take action, and who left a lasting impact. Leadership isn't shaped just through strategies and frameworks alone. It is shaped through stories. Stories that challenge assumptions, stories that expand our perspective, stories that help us become the leaders our communities need us to be. When you join the MLDC, you unlock the entire summer series, but you unlock even more. You unlock the weekly leadership content, the live mastermind sessions, the nationwide community of local government leaders, and all the MLDC resources, not just for the summer, but for the rest of 2026. If you are looking for a place to continue growing this summer while connecting with leaders who understand the unique challenges of local government, I would love to invite you to join us. Learn more at haltingwinter.com/MLDC or simply use the link in the show notes. Now, back to the conversation. Amazing. I love, again, getting people to work together, community members to own their challenges.
Exactly.
Huge. But then speak to, because again, we have a lot of city managers, administrators that listen to this, and I'm sure that they, many of them are frustrated because they see they have the vision like you had, but those are risks to put money on the line for the city to invest, like you said, in that, the infrastructure to be able to bring in commercial and industrial stuff. Is the professional leader of the organization. I'm sure there were long conversations with the city council to say, we've got to make this investment if we really want to see growth. Talk about how could you encourage a city manager who's listening to this, that's trying to make that happen and doesn't just want to, bully it through, but wants to say, how did you engage with your city council to get them to trust the investment of that magnitude for its future?
So I know that a lot of cities do what we do and a lot of cities don't. But I think the key to making that all work is something I mentioned to you earlier. And that's every year, the 3-day strategic planning session the mayor and city council has. So we do that every August. Matter of fact, today we have our consultant in town for 2 days meeting with all our department managers so he can collect information to share with the city council. So when they have their August session, they have all this information from the city staff. Before the August session, he interviews individually each of the 7 council members to see what things are they interested in prioritizing. And guess what? Every 2 years, there's an election. So you always have new council members with different priorities. So they spend those 3 days in August, and they might start off with like 125 things on the board that are things that people have brought up, residents, staff, elected officials, that ought to be a priority. But what I tell them is by the end of the 3 days, you got to have 10 or 15 things left on that list, because if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And they do it. And so every year they come up with 10 to 15 things. And then what I do is I take those priorities that they've established, I give them to the department managers and the city boards and commissions. And I say, okay, now in next April, I have to make a budget recommendation, a $250 million city budget. Between now and then, what I need you to do is tell me, what do you need to make these 10 to 15 things happen that the city council says, I want to see happen? And so they give me all their ideas and requests. And then guess what? There's never enough money, right? So then I put together a budget recommendation based on the amount of resources. I present that to the city council, but I tell them everything that everybody asked for. I just don't tell them the things I think they ought to do. I say, okay, here's everything that was asked for. Here's the ones that I picked, and here's how I see financing them to accomplish the things you want us to accomplish next year. And then the council goes through, we have 7 public budget hearings where every department makes a presentation publicly, and the residents can come and then testify at each of the hearings, say, I think the manager's right on this or wrong on that. And at the end, of course, the council has to adopt that $250 million budget, the 5-year capital improvement program. But since it's all based on what they said they wanted to happen, then we now have the energy around starting to make that stuff happen. So when you say, okay, now we have to issue this much debt to do this, everybody understands why. That doesn't mean everybody supports it. I'm not being Pollyannish here, but it means stuff happens and everybody knows why.
Exactly. Communication, clarification to make sure, like you said, it's not just communication, but it's clarification to say, this is why it matters. This is why we need to do it. This is why it's going to help. I think that's a lot of the things I see as I travel and speak and engage with leaders across the nation. It just seems like we're doing a lot of communication behind closed doors, but we're not bringing that forward. I don't think it's malicious. We're trying to be hidden. We're so exhausted by the conversation that we forget you got to bring the residents in. You got to bring other departments together. And until I always say, until a municipal leader is sick and tired of talking about it, you have not yet communicated it enough.
Well, so I know this word gets way overused, transparency, but it's unbelievably important. And as I said before, it's doing things with people and not for people. And the transparency part helps people understand what the issues are and what the potential options are. But then the participation part is where then the options come out that, okay, here's the one we're actually going to do. And it's because we got input from people and good suggestions, and here's how it's going to work. Well, so I used that example earlier, the B Branch project, $250 million stormwater management project. So we had to acquire 100 properties for that, and 60 of them had homes on them. Well, after we went through that multi-year process with that 40-member resident committee from those neighborhoods, everybody knew what had to happen. We had to do one eminent domain out of 100 properties. And think about that. It's just because we didn't just show up and say, hey, here's the answer and we're going to start doing it. I mean, that would have been a fist fight, but that's not what it was.
So good. I want to get to the guiding principles of your management philosophy because I think they are astounding. But I want to, before we hit that, I just want to take a moment because in another thing that you sent, You talk about Benjamin Zander, who was the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, right, and was a great mentor to me. I was an orchestral conductor. I actually studied a little bit with Benjamin, and his interpretation of Shostakovich's Symphony No. 5 will forever be branded in my mind and in my heart.
Oh, wow.
And so speak to something, because I think this is actually one of the keynotes. I haven't actually yet presented it, but it's in my hopper, and I hope that that's probably going to be the one big keynote of this next year of 2027. But it is how to lead your municipal organization like a conductor, because I think the conductor and the city manager are so much alike, because in this idea of you are on the podium leading multiple sections, multiple musicians, you as a city manager, multiple departments, multiple mindsets, multiple people fighting for priorities. And yet you have to create balance. You have to create harmony, but you are the only one on that stage without an instrument. You have this silent baton that is trying to connect and lead and bring everyone together. Talk about, I just found it interesting that you brought Benjamin Zander up. Talk about that and what you have looked at before we get into the four precise principles. Talk about that connection of the conductor, of the city manager, of what kind of that has opened your eyes to see in your unique leadership position.
Sure. Well, on my printed management philosophy is this quote that I'm going to give you in a minute from Benjamin Zander, the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic. And every month we have a new employee orientation sessions, and I do the introductory remarks. And I always conclude my introductory remarks with this quote: "The conductor of an orchestra does not make a sound. He depends for his power on his ability to make other people powerful." And I tell the new employees, that's my job. My job is to make you powerful. I need to make sure you have the right equipment, the right resources, the right amount of budget allocation to do the things you're being asked to do. That's my job, is to make you powerful. And I obviously I believe in it to my core, which is why it's on the printed page of my management philosophy. And I ask people, and we talk about the four principles. One of is to hold each other accountable. I emphasize to people, accountability is not a top-down thing; it's a bottom-up thing. You, as employees, need to hold us accountable. You need to hold your supervisors accountable, your department managers, the city manager. You need to hold us accountable, because you can't do your job unless we make sure that you have the tools to do it.
So good. Let's walk through the four. They are in order: be curious, be problem solvers, develop partnerships, and like you just said, hold each other accountable. Start with be curious. I think it's one of the greatest, not only mindsets, but just traits, curiosity. And it's one of those that I think is probably most lacking in local government. It's easy. Kind of the motto of local government seems to be, well, that's just the way we've always done it. And I think curiosity helps actually destroy that kind of comfort that's not really doing anything for the organization or for the community, and helps us get forward. Talk about why is that number one? Tell us about be curious.
Sure. So a couple things about that. I don't know if you've ever heard the education, Ken Robinson's his name. He's an expert in education. He's passed away now, but you can still watch his YouTube videos. But he talks about that when a kid enters kindergarten, we spend the next 13 years trying to beat their creativity out of them. And I would take it the same thing with this be curious. So the opening statement of this part of my management philosophy says, curiosity leads to a culture of learning and continuous improvement for ourselves and our organization. And I'm just such a strong believer. We just have to be in a phase of continuous improvement always. And one of the ways we express it in general is be curious and not judgmental. Because it's so easy, like when you're looking at an issue or a problem, trying to judge others or place blame, or forget that part. What you want to be is curious about how did we get where we're at, and how can we move forward? And that curiosity brings everybody into the decision-making process, and it helps where people don't feel like they're being judged or isolated. And none of these things I'm saying is easy. So first of all, I'm not perfect by any means. and I screw up plenty. But that goes back to the fourth one, which is hold people accountable. I just love when somebody comes into my office and says, Mike, that meeting didn't go very well. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? You're right. It didn't. So anyway, I think this idea of continuous improvement, being curious and not being judgmental really creates an atmosphere to come up with some really great solutions.
Talk about just for a second, because I wonder, I think I meet many city managers who are busy in your story. So, I mean, all that you accomplished, these huge projects, I'm sure your schedule was insane. Yet you made time to do things like the Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management, Harvard Kennedy School. You made time. I think curiosity, we can all say, oh, okay, I want to be more curious. It's a practice, though. And in the highest levels, your organization won't be curious unless you as the leader are curious. And I think you're displaying that curiosity, which is learning as well. Talk about how the significance of taking time out of your crazy schedule and family and all these dynamics to do things like those schooling programs to continue to learn and to stay curious.
Well, one of the things I've always tried to protect in the city budget, and guess what? We've had hard times like every other community, especially during the pandemic, but there's plenty of other times, is I've always tried to protect our continuing education budgets, so our conference and training budgets, because I just feel like if you don't protect that, you're giving up your seed corn. You're going to suffer. You won't suffer from that for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, but you're going to suffer from it. A, by you're going to lose good people. B, you're not going to attract good people. But C, even the great people you have are going to have much more challenges to try and come up with the good ideas and the good solutions. So I've always tried to protect that. And, I'm going to use a saying my wife has. I've told you that we've had over 30 children live in our home in our lifetime. And my wife had a saying when I met her. She said, if there's room in the heart, there's room in the home. And I should have paid closer attention to that, by the way, and said, what do you mean? But it's the same thing with your question about how do you make time for things like continuing education and learning. I love to read. So when I get up in the mornings and I take my dog for her 3 or 4 mile walk, I listen to books on tape. So what you do is you figure out how to make it work, because there are ways to make it work. You got to get up at 4:30 in the morning. That's okay. Right. I've been doing that for 25 years. But you just have to make those. As I tell my kids, my grandkids, our foster kids, everything in life is a choice. Make good ones.
I love it. It's so good. Number 2, be problem solvers. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So I think we have, in local government, we have this really special responsibility. There's all these people and businesses in town, and they're really experts at their own lives or their own business, but they're not experts in a lot of things that impact their lives on a daily basis. And when they come to us with something, they don't want us to tell them why it can't happen or it's not affordable, or let's go through the list of all the bureaucratic answers. They want us to solve the problem. And as long as they believe that we make a sincere effort to do that, even if in the end, well, we can't afford to do it this way, but we can do this, or we can't do this, even though it might be the best thing to do, but it's not practical. People will be very understanding as long as they think you made a sincere effort. But if you sort of blew them off or told them, oh, wow, that can never happen, well, you're headed to big trouble, I think. So one of our real strong principles is we want to be problem solvers.
I think that's the thing too, is the way, not only is it solving practical projects, it's also customer service, right? It's
exactly
the way
right.
We engage. Number 3, develop partnerships. I think this is one of the things I've heard most on the show this last year is that local government cannot do it alone. It needs partners, not only inside to make sure we're collaborating department to department, but outside.
Exactly.
The hospitals, the schools, nonprofits, the residents. Talk to us about how that's played out in your season.
Well, our theory is that anything that can be done better in partnership with others. It brings more resources, more support, more public interest, and partnerships are really fragile. So, I have for years, I have a list of about 20 people a quarter, some of them monthly, that I have lunch with, because, the head of the chamber and the head of the development corporation. I meet with the school superintendent every month. I mean, I can just keep going down the list, but you have to nurture those partnerships all the time. And Thomas Jefferson had a saying, is it's hard to hate somebody you've broken bread with. And so if you have those experiences with your partners, when the going gets tough, they're going to know who you are. You're going to know who they are. They're going to know, your sincerity. So anything you can do better with partners. I'll guarantee you that.
I love that idea of breaking bread, because there is something about, if the relationship is just about the project, man, there's so many ways the project is going to have tension and stress.
Right.
But if you know someone with some depth outside of what that project is, like you say, then it feels like you're a person and not just a caricature, not just a means to
exactly
for that thing. So good.
Right.
And then you've mentioned it, the fourth one, hold each other accountable. An accountable organization. Talk maybe about this unique angle. It seems in local government, one of the differences between the public sector and the private sector is competitive, right? There are multiple businesses fighting for the dollar, fighting for branding, fighting for attention. In local government, there's only one city of Dubuque. You're not in competition.
Right.
Now, you might, again, resources have to be shared, but in the county and whatnot, but it's not like the private sector. And so what can happen in local government is, if there is one of these big projects you took on, I'm sure you've had failure in one, in projects. And when a project fails, it seems like there's not a patience for learning. It's more like, who's going to be the scapegoat, and a person has to become that scapegoat. And so it means then that accountability can kind of limit then risk. Like, well, is it accountability? Is it real accountability where we're actually learning and helping our failures take us forward? Or is it accountability with just radical consequence because it's a political environment and someone had to suffer? Maybe talk about that and how you've managed that, how you do accountability real well to make sure people aren't afraid of it. They actually welcome it.
Yeah. So, it goes back to the first guiding principle, which is the being curious part. As long as you're sincere about that's part of your ethos and your organization, you have such a much better chance of the accountability part working. And I kind of used an example earlier, but I'll say it a little bit more. So I was in a meeting with 5 department managers, and it was a tough meeting. Something hadn't gone right, and I had a lot of questions about why it didn't go right. And after the meeting, one of the department managers was kind enough to call me and say, Mike, I really have to talk to you about the meeting this morning, because it didn't go well. And then she explained to me why she felt like that. And as soon as I hung up the phone from her, I called the other 4 department managers and I apologized to every one of them, because she was right. But I can tell you, if she hadn't called me, I was gone. I was on to the rest of my day. That was over for me. I was never going to apologize to anybody, because I wasn't even going to think about it anymore. But her having that kindness to call me up, to tell me that, so that I could take a step back and think about it, and then call and apologize to all those department managers, that's the kind of accountability you need. You need the kind of accountability where people have the courage to say, wait a minute, this is not right, what's happening here right now. And it's not easy. Believe me, I get it. It's not easy. But if you have that internal organizational accountability, your accountability to the public, I think, is going to go so much better. Because yes, the public are going to attack individuals, and that's the lens they can see. But as long as that individual knows, hey, I've got the support of my organization, we're going to go back. Yeah, it didn't go right. We're going to go back and figure this out. But the figuring out part isn't going to be jumping right to, hey, Mary, you're the problem.
It seems, in light of that story you just shared, in light of accountability, yes, it was the kindness, it was the boldness of that person to be able to reach out to you. But like it states in your thing, and you stated before, emotional intelligence is so necessary for a leader, because most leaders, I think, would tend in a call like that to justify their actions. You seem to have practiced real genuine listening, real curiosity, allowed that to then make a healthy action instead of just a justified one.
So Nelson Mandela had a saying that holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So you really do have to let that stuff go, because if you can't let that go, boy, public service might not be for you, because quite frankly, all the time, all your mistakes are going to be played out on the front page of the newspaper. That's just the way the business works.
I want to be mindful of your time. I want to look at one more thing. You announced your retirement because in 2025, I believe it was, a drunk driver hit and ran you. And
Yeah.
Were you on a bicycle at the time? Is that?
I had just stepped out in my car in downtown Dubuque, and a drunk driver came along and basically ran me over and broke up my kneecap into multiple parts. So they found him 45 minutes later, passed out in his car on the side of the road. He was so drunk that he couldn't even make it home. But I didn't get killed, so I'm looking at the bright side of that one.
That's right. And you mentioned in kind of your retirement announcement that was a wake up. You were already thinking of retirement years down the road, but this is kind of shortened that timeline. The thing I want to talk about is the culture or the position of a city manager. I say it's like I was a pastor. I was a conductor for the first 10 years of my life. Then I was a pastor for 10 years. And I think a pastor and a city manager, man, there's so many similarities in light of it's a role that just, that role doesn't shut off. You are the city manager, whether you are going to City Hall, whether you're going to the grocery store, people see you as that. They do not necessarily, you're not really seen as a person. You're seen as this role, this title. That means then that it is very challenging, especially for a servant-hearted leader, to ever say no, to have boundaries, to not always want to be on. I mean, I think about a city, you have so many projects, you can work 24/7 if you want to, if your body would actually keep up to that. How does Mike, how did you wrestle with burnout, with setting boundaries, with making sure that, again, you had family, you have your wife? What does that look like? What insights would you have now looking back at your career to say, here's maybe how I would have did it different, or here's what I did, what I learned along the way in my career to create some space so I could actually rest, refresh, and bring my best self to work?
God, I wish I had a great answer. I talk about getting up very early in the morning and doing my exercise program, and I've done it forever. That for me, starting a solid foundation every day is so helpful for me. And I think, so the mayor recently asked me, because they're starting the recruitment process for my replacement, in my evaluation session with the council, he asked me about, well, what do you want to be remembered for, Mike? And I said, really two things. And I talked about my parents being the greatest generation, growing up during the Great Depression, serving in World War II. I said, first of all, I want my parents to be proud of me. And I hope that sounds okay to people, because it's important to me. My parents are both passed away, but I wanted them to be proud of me, because the sacrifices they made for our country and for us as a family are unbelievable. But I said, the second thing I want is people to know I cared about them. So they might not have agreed with the decisions I made. They might not agree with how I did things or all kinds of things, but I hope they know that I cared. Whether you're an employee or whether you're a resident or whether you're a business, I really care about you and your personal success. And for me, that makes all the work, all the time you put in, it makes it all worth it. And so I just think it's one of the greatest privileges in the world that I ended up in this job, and, to be a public servant. And, I talked about the fact that, living a life of purpose is so important. And everybody has a different purpose. One might be that their family is their total purpose, and somebody else might be it's their job, and somebody else might be it's some cause that they really care about. So, purpose is a big word. This just happened to be mine. I have a wonderful family. I'm so privileged to have that. And I love my job. And everybody loves their job. So, yeah.
Oh, an amazing story from a 2-bedroom house sleeping in the hallway with your brother to the city management chair in Dubuque, Iowa. 33 years. What an incredible legacy! What an incredible impact, and more still. I can't wait to see. You have so many great insights. I think you would be a treasure to continue to influence continued
Thanks,
in local government. Well, thanks, Mike, for sharing your life, your leadership journey, your insights. Anything you'd like to close with?
No, other than I appreciate the fact that you contacted me and wanted to do the interview. So thank you very much.
It's definitely our pleasure. The audience is going to love this one. Again, thanks, Mike, for sharing your time.
All right. Thanks, Seth.
The stories we share here on the Halting Winter podcast remind us where government really lives, locally, right here in our cities, our counties, the communities that shape our everyday life. If today's conversation resonated with you, please subscribe and share the episode to help these stories reach others. I'm Seth Winterhalter. You can find me at HaltingWinter.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.